processes are categorized so that we can have an easier imagery and understanding of where those processes belong and what type of knowledge is required for project manager to do that specific process. So I'll give you examples. We have 5 process groups. We have initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. So these are our 5 process groups. Why do we call them process groups? Because they're not processes, they're groups or categories of processes that have a very logical compartmentalization. They're affinitized in a very specific way. And this is how. Initiating. What is initiating? Initiating is getting something started, right? Signing off on something to begin. Okay. In terms of project management, initiating means getting the project authorized to begin. What does that involve? Well, that involves creating a project charter. It involves identifying stakeholders. It involves quite a few things. We have to figure out our business case, and we have to look at the constraints, and we have to possibly do our cost-benefit analysis and expected monetary value analysis. All of these things that I'm saying that are not known to you yet, don't worry. They will not stay unknown to you. We will get to them. But I'm just trying to say and communicate to you that there are lots of things that have to take place before we decide to undertake a project. So we might decide that, oh, no, this project is not worthwhile. It will cost us more than it will do than the benefit that we're going to get from it. Or we might take a look at it and realize that it's not feasible due to certain constraints or certain enterprise environmental factors or changing organizational needs or priorities. So in order for us to start a project, to initiate a project, we have to make sure that we have a sign-off on a project charter. Project charter is the official document that, once signed off by the project sponsor, marks the official beginning of the project. Without initiating, there is no project. So project has to get initiated and approved. As part of initiating, a project manager is assigned. They're assigned a specific level of authority as they run the project. They're given the permission to use the funds to now have this project take place. So there are lots of things that we have to consider when we're initiating a project to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for a failure. The initiating process group, remember I said process group, that process group has 2 processes. It has developing a project charter, and it has identifying stakeholders. Our next class, we will actually talk about each of those 2 processes, and we will cover initiating as a process group. Planning is the next process group. In planning, now we have an authorized project that was authorized in initiating, and now we have to move forward and make sure that our project is well planned. We have to consider different things. We have to consider what are the customer requirements, what are the technical requirements, what is the full scope of our project, what is the budget, what is the schedule, what are the risks associated with this project, how do we assess these risks, what type of risk response plan and strategies we're going to use to deal with these risks. Will we have to utilize outside resources? Will we be outsourcing some of the work? What types of resources will be needed to begin with? What are the quality standards for this project? What are the communication standards, and what types of communications will we utilize in order to meet the requirements and to run this project smoothly? And very importantly also, who are the stakeholders and how will we make sure that we are engaging them throughout the project lifecycle so that we're getting the best possible outcome as a result of it? So in planning, majority of our processes, more than half of our processes, are in the planning process group. Therefore, we will not cover process group of planning in one session, whereas initiating, which only has 2 processes, we can cover in one session. It'll take us, like you saw in your syllabus, several sessions to get through all the planning processes, because in order to be able to execute your project and meet your project deliverable and be successful in a project, it is imperative that you have planned your project well. Okay, so planning process group is a big chunk of what we're going to be doing in this class, and it's going to set you up to plan any project, any size, whether it's your personal career development plan all the way to building a skyscraper or a bridge. So the processes that we're going to learn here are applicable to any size of a project, whether it's a personal endeavor like you are renovating your home, or it's something as complex as building large objects, creating new infrastructures in IT, or whatever it is that gets thrown your way. No matter what it is that you're tasked with to do, as long as what you're doing is a temporary endeavor, has a beginning and an end, and it has a specific goal that you have to achieve, things we learn here, you can apply to make sure that you're successful in what you're doing. So that was planning. Next process group is executing. The process group of executing contains processes that are critical to being able to perform and get the project tasks and project activities actually accomplished. So those are the things. What does executing mean? Do. You're doing the project. So the things that you plan to do, you're now doing. You're executing them. You're completing the work. It's a very important process group. It has important processes like being able to direct and manage your project team, being able to build your team, right? To develop your team, to make sure your team is performing strong throughout your project lifecycle. So it's really, really important. There are lots of really important processes that are in executing process group. Then we have monitoring and controlling. So now, I want to ask you, if you're watching a child, right? And the child is painting, and they chose for the first time to use water paint in your house. Are you going to let them, and their project is to paint something, are you going to let them paint and then monitor and control their activities? Or are you going to monitor and control while they're executing it?
The second one.
The second one, yes. The last thing you want is not to be able to monitor. You can't monitor something if it's already done. What do we call it? Damage is done. Your walls probably have all kinds of paintings by now, right? So, in other words, executing and monitoring and controlling takes place at the same time. Why am I emphasizing this? Because we had to first initiate, then plan. We had to plan, then execute. But with monitoring and controlling, it's different. We have to monitor the work while it's being executed. And as we monitor and notice things about how we're doing, we're watching that performance, we have to control to make sure that the work is meeting the planned requirements. So we monitor and control while we execute, because if we don't monitor and control things while we're executing, we can't monitor and control them once the executing is done, because the work is done. There's nothing to monitor. It's done, right? Either it's good or it's not good, right? So we have to make sure that we understand that we initiate, then we plan, then we execute and monitor and control. And sometimes as a result of controlling, we have to change the plans and we have to update our plans, right? So sometimes as a result of doing monitoring and controlling activities, we end up with change orders, change requests that make us have to go back to the planning process and update some of our plans and make sure that we're running off the most recent plans. There are lots of really important processes in monitoring and controlling, like controlling scope, controlling cost, controlling schedule. There are lots of formulas that we're going to learn, like how to monitor and how to be able to make sure that you are on your budget, that you're on schedule. So it's really, really important for us to understand that piece, that monitoring and controlling is really critical to making sure that we're meeting, that our work executed, that our deliverables are meeting the standards that are required by our project, as well as by the plans, specific plans, specific milestones within our project. Then we have closing. Closing has only one process. It's a process group with one process. I'm not sure it's a group, but it's called a process group. It used to have two, but then they changed the framework a little bit, so it has one. And it's called close project or project phase. Now, you might wonder, why does it say close project or project phase? Can anybody take a stab at that? Why is it not just close project? That's it.
Could you repeat the first half again of the question?
Sure. So why is the process in closing called close project or project phase and not just close project?
Probably because the project sometimes can take multiple stages, and if you close the project, you're shutting down the entire thing. While if you complete a certain aspect of it, you can shut that down and nobody has to put work towards that and then move on to a different area as part of the whole.
Very good. So, it's excellent. So, the closing process group has one process called close project or project phase, because sometimes our projects are divided into smaller logical pieces called phases, right? And as a result of each of those phases, we have certain portion of it completed. That's called our interim deliverable. We want to make sure that we close that phase properly, follow all the steps of closure, right? To close that phase properly and make sure that we can then move that interim deliverable into our next phase of the project, in which we're then making sure we're initiating that project phase, we're doing any additional planning needed for that phase, we're executing, monitoring, controlling, and then we're closing that phase out. With that closure of that phase, that closeout, we end up with a new interim deliverable, which then becomes an input into the next phase. So if our project is large enough to where it needs phases, it needs to be broken down into phases, it is really important to know that our process of closing project or project phase has to happen not just all the way at the end of the project. It has to happen at each end of the project phase. Another important benefit of doing project closeout of each phase at the end of each phase is because you want that official sign-off. Phase sign-off. You're getting a sign-off that you've reached that milestone successfully. So why would that matter? Because you don't want to end up at the end of the project and they say, you know what, none of this is good, right? If I have 4 phases in my project, I get a sign off on phase 1, sign off on phase 2, sign off on phase 3. When I'm in my last phase, phase 4, can the customer say, oh, none of this is good? No, because they've signed off on first 3 phases. So it can reduce a lot of conflict, a lot of costs that can be otherwise incurred. And I think it's a very smart way of going about making sure you're recognizing those phases as your mini projects. And the closeout of each produces an interim deliverable until you get to your last phase, which then you have your final deliverable. So that's how we divide the project processes and categorize them according to their process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing.